Hi, everybody. Welcome, and hope that you're doing well in your studies, because counseling, is a very, very complex and yet such a rewarding study of academia and a trade and a profession, and I have always loved it and hope you're challenged and learning lots of good things. What a cool time to be actually in the field because of all the great research coming out, the things that we're finding out, not only the developmental spectrum, not only the how things are going in character, which is what our specialty is here at the Institute, but also in the brain and neuroscience. So, explosion of information. Hey, speaking of explosion of information, we're going to talk about a thing called flooding. And if you've kind of been into the literature, there's two kinds of flooding in the field. And we're going to talk about one of them and not the second one. One of them is a behavioral technique that you do where you overexpose someone to some kind of a noxious stimulus, like somebody that's afraid of being in planes, you put them in planes a lot, or somebody that's afraid of a certain sound, you expose them to sounds a lot. You got to do the usual diagnostics about fragility of ego structure and this sort of thing. But the idea on a behavioral standpoint is if you flood someone with a sound or an experience that they're afraid of, then their brain gets used to it, normalizes, and they move on. We're not talking about that one. We're talking about flooding in a whole different way, which is very, very useful in doing counseling in terms of being overwhelmed. When your client, your counselee, has the experience of kind of shutting down and not knowing what's going on. You may have had that experience. I've had experiences in my life where I've been overwhelmed and my brain's flooded, and it took a while to kind of get some sense of a perspective back, some sense of being centered and this sort of thing. And I want to talk about that and when that happens, because it's going to happen when you're doing clinical work. It just does. And there's reasons for it, and how to help the client resolve it, not reserve it. You don't want to reserve it. But that's our title, Flooding and How to Help Your Client Resolve It. Key Bible passage is one that really puts in the elements that God has in the process of helping someone who's flooded. Whoever pursues righteousness and love finds life, prosperity, and honor. Proverbs 21:21. And what that's referring to is that, as you know, I believe that really good, healthy research always backs up what the Bible says. That God says in this passage in Proverbs that when we pursue a couple of things. One is righteousness. And what is righteousness? Well, it is living right. When you're righteous, you live. Righteous is not some kind of holy person that you can't relate to. Just meaning I'm walking down the right path. That there's a structure. It's healthy living. It's living the way we're engaged. And we're going to show you. I'm going to show you in our didactic, like, what the path has to do with helping flooding, and also love. And love has to do with attachment, as you know. So much of life is about attachment and relationship. And so those are going to be the two keys that really help a person to move out of flooding into life, prosperity, and honor. So first off, how does flooding happen? Well, the way the brain works is that, remember, if you remember my talks about grief and this sort of thing, is that you have two brains inside. You have the brain that is the present brain, the brain we're in right now. Hopefully you're sitting here and or watching the video and you're going, John's not making any sense. So, I'd rather go get a latte. Well, some people believe that, right? That's our present brain. That's kind of our RAM, the thinking and processing in the moment existential brain. But we have a second brain, and that's our past brain. And our past brain has two things in it. It has memories. I have lots of memories in my life. You have lots in your life, positive and negative memories. Memories of a great sunset, or cool times with people you love, or worship times, or horrible times that were sad and hard. But memories, we all need our memories, and also our lessons, the lessons learned, like, I'll learn how to avoid that conversation again, or I'll never make that mistake in money again, or whatever. So there's this past brain with memories and lessons, and there's this present brain where we are right now. And God set up these neural pathways. Remember the neural pathways? I'll just call them NP. Our neural pathways are the ones that help us to process this information that we're in right now as we're talking down into here, and then it's useful to us because you have to make decisions and you want to understand from your memories, the lessons, and et cetera, et cetera. So the neural pathways are the freeways. Well, when this part of the brain, this top part of the brain is overwhelmed, is giving data and information experiences that are too much to fill up here. You ever been like having too many windows open on your computer and all of a sudden the thing freezes because you got 20 apps open and you're playing a video game and you're trying to write something and you're also watching TV and you're doing social media and it goes freeze. It says, I am overwhelmed. Well, because you got too much in the system and it can't just travel down these paths. So, on a computer level, you try to reboot. Well, this is sort of a way to reboot. But that experience of there's too much in here that can't be processed and metabolized down here is being overwhelmed, which we call flooding. And it comes out in lots of ways, none of which are good for us because you can't function, you can't do the things you need to do, and it's really, really horrible. And I've had clients who would sometimes bring the flooding to the clinical session, which is where you want it. When they talk about their flooding, well, I flooded with, I don't know, I had a big fight with my husband or my wife, or I got in a traffic accident, or I don't know, had a problem at work. Well, you can help them because you want to be empathic and unpack it, but what really helps is when you're talking about something and they get to these really hard feelings about something and they begin flooding, and you'll see them do things like they won't be able to speak well, and they won't have, they'll have speaking, articulating problems. They just won't speak well. They'll have thinking problems. They won't think clearly. They don't know what they're doing, what they're saying. They'll have emotional problems. They'll, sometimes start crying and not know why, or not be able to stop crying, or they'll just stop. They'll just kind of sit there and look at you. That's a sign that if they're not being defensive or anything, most of the time it's not that they're flooding. So let's talk about what to do about it. The definition I have is basically a state of being psychologically overwhelmed. In other words, it's not about their circumstances. It's never about their circumstances. It's about the reaction of their brain to their circumstances. Remember, circumstances don't create depression. Circumstances don't create anxiety. It's the brain's reaction that are triggered by those circumstances. It's how the brain copes or doesn't cope with that. So they're psychologically overwhelmed. So the second thing about the brain I want to show you is, remember the good old EFs here, executive function? Now this is a different way of looking at the brain. But executive functions are, those parts of the brain that think at a higher level. They give it, we plan, we strategize for our life, we have missions and values, we have dreams and desires, we plan. That's the executive functions. And then we have the amygdala functions, right? And that's the lower cortical parts, which is, sort of like what the people sometimes call the lizard brain. And guess which part of the brain happens when we go into an overwhelmed situation? If you're really healthy and you do this all the time, you go to executive functions. Fighter pilots just go to executive functions. What am I supposed to do now? Cardiac surgeons. Aren't you glad your cardiac surgeon thinks about what they're doing and can plan ahead instead of getting frozen? If I have to go to heart surgery, I want this guy or this gal, right? But most of the time when you've got a client who's having these experiences, I can't speak right, I'm not thinking right, the emotions are going crazy, this is what's called there in the amygdala function. And there's a very famous phrase that people use to help them understand that, and when I say this phrase, it'll make total sense, and I added a little bit to the phrase just from my own experience working with clients. And it's this: fight or flight, right? That's what the amygdala is doing. It's saying either fight, I've got to push back, I've got to get mad, I've got to get my power up, I've got to protect myself, I've got to yell at you, I've got to, break out of this room, but I've got to do something aggressive. Fight is about aggressive, AGG, I'm just using abbreviation, aggressive protection. I got to get in a knockdown, drag out. That's why a lot of times you'll realize when you're like doing couples work, men are more prone to aggression and don't control that as well as they should, and women are more prone to giving away power. That's where a lot of marital work goes. Not always that way, sometimes the other way. But a man will escalate. We talk about escalating in a conflict, when a man gets threatened, what will do? He'll a lot of times yell louder, or say the same things over and over again, even say mean things and threaten. That's the fight response. The flight response is that you want to remove yourself. I just got to get out of here. I got to get out of the room. I've got to, escape because I'm in a scary situation. Now, obviously, these are short-term responses to a problem, and they work maybe for a few minutes, but that's not how to handle a marriage or a successful life or working with a church or having your own business or child raising or dating or anything, right? If you're always in amygdala fight or flight mode because you're flooding, life's not going to work. You're not going to be successful. I found in my own work 2 more F's here. These are mine. These aren't like, I don't have a research study for these. I've just seen just so many of these though. Is the third one I have is freeze. What does freeze mean? Is I'm paralyzed. When the client because people do different things when they're overwhelmed or flooded. I'm not going to push against you and yell and scream and get mad. I'm not going to run away. I'm stuck. I'm the deer. They talk about the deer in the headlights. And I've seen so many clients just get like that, and I'll say, what's going on? I don't know. And they can barely speak because the amygdala is telling them, get like that little, I was raised in North Carolina. We used to look for lizards and snakes. And when a lizard or snake, when you came across one on the trail, they would freeze. They would think they were hiding from you, and that's how they could successfully hide. That's all they had. And so they were like this. And the closer you got, the more they would just be quiet, without movement, thinking, he'll get away from me. And that's the freeze response, and you'll have somebody do that. Then there's another one. It's fold. And what I mean by fold is compliance. The person will just say, if it's a relationship that they're feeling flooded, and they'll just say, do what you want. I'll give you my money. I'll give you my body. I'll comply. I'll go on your schedule. Just don't get mad at me. Whatever you want to do. And this is when you look at all the boundaries material about what happens when the compliant feels controlled by fear of anger or fear of loss of love or fear of conflict or fear of guilt and all that sort of thing. They'll just fold. I'll just do it your way, the compliant mode. So these are the 4 short-term coping but non-functional, non-helpful strategies. They just help the person to survive when they're flooded. So what do? Well, there's a lot of what we're finding out about flooding comes from the trauma research. A lot of great trauma research in there, and as I believe, that trauma is not everything that creates dysfunction. And when people tell me that all things come from trauma, I just do not agree. I think there's dysfunctional characterological internalized relationships, and there's trauma, and there's sometimes a combination of trauma and dysfunctional characterological internalized relationships. That's a bad scene, but they're not the same thing. But in the trauma research, I'll give an example. When 9/11 happened, the big American tragedy, there was a big problem because of all these people who were either loved someone there or were in the Twin Towers or working in Manhattan or had a person in their life. And they were traumatized by the horror of what went on. And so the smart people, the researchers, are trying to figure out how can we help them to get through this. And they found 3 things. And this ties into where I'm going to go with this. One is they had to be able to process. You got to talk about your feelings, and you had to process repeatedly. You had to say, I saw the smoke and it was coming at me. I thought I was going to choke. I saw the smoke. I thought it was coming out. I was going to choke. Like a little kid does when they're scared and your kid gets in bed with you at 3 o'clock in the morning and says there's a big bloody monster and he has, blood on his teeth, and they have to tell you 3 or 4 times, and then a good parent goes and checks the closet and says, I think there's nothing there. We're okay. I'll protect you, and comes back in. The kid says it a couple more times because they're trying to make you hear it. If you hear it after they say it several times, the kid goes, I'm not alone. Okay, you get it. That's the process part. Second part, there's got to be a safe person. Somebody who's warm and doesn't give a lot of advice, is not impatient, but just, they can contain, the containing functions. The third thing was go back to work. And this was sort of the mind blower because we found out that we thought, gosh, do they need 6 months off of work, a year off work? Well, some people do, but most people, as soon as they felt up to it, to go back to work was okay, and it began to help them resolve the trauma because of this. They had a regularity a regularity of schedule. In other words, you knew you get there at 8 o'clock, and then you go get your K-cup, and then you talk, and then you got a break at 10:30, and you're on your email, and you're on the phone, and at lunchtime you got lunch, and then there's a team meeting, and you're out at 5:30, or whatever it was. It was a predictable schedule, and that calmed them down. You know why? Because a regular schedule gives us a sense of control. Like life is not chaos. Life is not disorderly. And so the addition of that to the processing your feelings with a safe person really helped a lot. Go back to the Bible verse I started the talk off with. Proverbs 21, whoever pursues righteousness and love. So people get the love they need from the process and somebody safe who helps contain, and the righteousness is that path of structure, and that's what really helps somebody who's flooding. So I have 3 things that apply to that I really think help. And they're going to apply to what we learned from PTSD and 9/11 and lots of stuff. So the person's in your office and they're doing one of the big 4. You know, they're mad, or they're doing whatever, or they're freezing, or they're complying and kind of a limp rag with no sense of willpower, or they're trying to escape. You contain. Now, we talked a lot about containing. Hopefully you're getting a lot of that from your coursework. And what is containing? Containing means you have a positive and accepting response to people's feelings. They can be screaming, they can be in convulsions, they can be mad, they can be panicked, and you're there and you're warm. They don't have to edit for you. They can vent and vent and vent, and it's okay. Now, you don't do containing forever, and if all of your sessions are nothing but containing, probably there's something going wrong, because sooner or later, once the person feels like, hey, my counselor gets it, and they're a nice person, and then they begin to slow down, because what happens in the containing function is the person's feelings are so intense and strong, it begins to take a life of its own. I mean, the person, like a little child, thinks, if I'm sad, the world's going to fall apart in tears. And if I'm mad, the world's going to blow up. The feelings are so real, and they're so bigger than me, and you're just going, I know you're upset and scared and mad, and I'm a grown-up, I can handle that. I'm okay with you. And they begin to know, not only is somebody with me, but that person can handle it, why can't I handle it? So containing helps them to be a little bit empowered, to feel like, okay, they're feelings, and feelings are never forever feelings. Second thing you do is you give them a certain amount of clarity. Once they've calmed down a little bit, then you can go into all the whys. Why do you think that happened? What was going on? And really, the 2 important things are identify the feeling. You know, one of the great things about our work is that you help them become responsible for identifying what they're feeling. A person that's flooding because I don't know what I'm feeling. I don't know what this is about. I don't know, because they're in a very regressed position. So once you've contained them, you say, okay, Sam, I'm kind of scratching my head. What was the feeling? I don't know. Well, sometimes I'll give them a menu. If they're totally sort of really raw in this, I'll give them a menu. Could it have been that you felt, scared or sad or upset or betrayed or guilty or shame or whatever? And they'll go, one from column 1, and that's fine. But after a while, they should be able to do this autonomously, on their own. They should go, I've had enough experience with you, the therapist. The reason I flooded was because I was so scared that I was going to die when my wife yelled at me because it reminded me of my own mother or whatever. And they become autonomous, and they go, that's what I was feeling. Okay, the second thing that you want to get clarity on is the meaning. And I kind of slipped in that for a second. Not only that I was scared, but why? And then you get into the really important what we call the genetic stuff, the family of origin stuff, significant relationship stuff, because it reminded me of this, it triggered this, it made me think of a horrible time in my life. And now, all of a sudden, they're out of their amygdala and they're back in the executive function. They're thinking with you, they're wondering with you, they're calming down, they're figuring this out. And the third thing, after containing and clarity, you give them a path. Okay, what's a path? Are there any actions? Now, actions can be psychological actions, they can also be behavioral actions. So, Sam, have we identified a grief that you've got to let go of and process, and I'll help you with that grief? Do you need to let something go that you wanted, a life, a relationship, a memory, something that's not going to happen again? Do you need to protest something? Do you need to be really saying, I'm really mad at my mom, my dad, my spouse, God, or whatever, and do I need to protest? Or do you need to go confront something? Do you need to go set some boundaries at work? Or do you need to go set some boundaries in your family? Or do you need to confess something and say to somebody, I need to be more vulnerable. Maybe you need to take a vulnerable action out of here and do something to tell somebody, I need help from you sometimes. Those are action steps, either the psychological action steps they do with you or the relational actions they do there with confronting or being vulnerable. That's the path part. Now look at the order here, guys. I didn't start with that because they're not able to take it. The containing is the love part. The clarity, now we're moving to love and the truth, kind of a combination of love and truth. Path is the truth part from the Psalm 21. So that's really how you handle the flooding they'll experience. If you're doing a good job, they'll flood. If you're not doing a good job, they'll never flood. That means you're really not getting deep enough, you're not really understanding them enough, or not being safe enough. If all they're doing is flooding, probably, my hunch is you're probably doing this stuff containing, but not enough clarity and path. But the right combination, when they start calming down, you get them to be a problem solver with you, and they pull out of it, and they begin to not react to things because they feel strong and empowered. So that is flooding, and it's a big part of helping somebody to move and grow in their process, all right? Hope that was helpful, and so glad you're a counselor. I've loved this whole career. All right, take care.